But we do have a special guest with us this morning. Melody Slaton is here with her husband, Chandler. Melody, come on up. Melody is our candidate for our Associate Pastor of Missions and Outreach. Chandler, you don't have to. You get to stay seated. It's good. And so she comes from unanimous recommendation of our search committee. That announcement was made a couple of weeks ago. And so she's going to share her testimony with us. And then we'll follow up in just a few moments. Melody.
All right, good morning. We are so excited to be here today. And a big thank you to the search committee and staff and everyone we've met so far. We've had nothing but a warm, hospitable greeting so far. How we got to the point where we are choosing you all is definitely a testimony of God's sovereignty and his ability to change hearts. I'm sure the roots of the story go back much further than I can tell, but for me, I can look back 3 years and definitely see the making of this in the coming. At the beginning of the pandemic, when we all had a little extra time at home, I decided to make a prayer board, a lot like a vision board. I took pictures and words and put them on a board, and it was a visual reminder of what to pray for. And as prayers were answered, I moved things from the front of the board to the back of the board, and it was just a powerful, graphic way of me to look at answered prayers. So at that point in time, my family and I had fairly recently returned from Costa Rica, and I was in seminary, and I asked myself quite often, what's next? As a dreamer, I had so many ideas. I thought maybe I'd convince Chandler we'd move to Portugal and plant a church. I thought maybe I will make a missional mini donut shop and be fulfilled that way. I had so many different grand ideas, but as it turns out, I was given a trial. In July of 2020, I got sick. I was sick to varying degrees for 8 months. Fevers lasted 3 weeks. Breathing difficulty lasted quite a bit longer than that. Brain fog, activity intolerance lasted the entire 8 months. I couldn't even walk through the store to do my own grocery shopping. I spent a lot of time on the couch. Physically, I was just on the couch a lot. And mentally, I spent a lot of time convincing myself that I wasn't worthy or capable of fulfilling any of the dreams I had had prior to that. And at 40 years old, although I didn't actually think I was going to die, I thought a lot about death and thought about how if I died, I'd be okay, right? We know that. But if I had to face this as my quality of life moving forward, it was going to be a very hard reality to face. So the process of healing began in April of 2021. I turned a corner physically, and it was a very slow process. It was about 1.5 years after initially getting sick until I felt like myself physically again. I still have some work to do, but I'm getting there. And my mental health, on the other hand, took a lot longer. I made progress as I healed with my mental health, but it wasn't until a short trip I took to North Dakota in this past August, when I could really see God at work healing my mental health. I was able to see God showing up for me in this trip. He just gave me an abundance. So I had 3 objectives on the trip, which was to see family, stars, and bison. And I reached out to a few family members, and dozens of family members showed up, some I hadn't even met yet. And we stayed late on the family farm, and the sky was just a blanket of stars. And at some point on that trip, we found ourselves safely caught in a bison crossing. So it was what felt like hundreds of bison we were able to see and take up close pictures. So that's really when I turned a corner, and I needed that to happen before this could happen. And of course, God knew that. So back to that prayer board I mentioned earlier. On that board in the professional section, I had the words seen and pursued. So I was praying that I would be seen and pursued, and that time came. So prior to North Dakota, I sent my resume out a few times, and when I got back, I could tell my resume was being seen and I was being pursued. I had lots of offers for interviews and requests, and one in particular was an email from Leisha, and she asked me about, this associate pastor missions position, and that's when I found out that Sugar Land is not just a country band, it's also a town in Texas. So that one caught my attention. I wasn't planning on applying because I did not want to leave my friends and family in Philadelphia, but Chandler and our youngest son just challenged me on that and said, why wouldn't you at least just give it a shot? So I did. And although the opportunity was what I was looking for professionally, again, geographically, it wasn't what I was looking for. So I went through the process, got the next email, and I thought it was rejection, and I was fine with that. But I saw the words in there, "You are of great interest to us," and I just kind of whined a little bit, like, why? But went through the process, went through the Zoom interview, and I didn't get a chance to prepare as I typically like to for my interviews because I had a really odd, busy day that day. But it went okay. And I had told Chandler at that point that if they reach out again to come in person, that I would tell them, okay, I'm willing to come, but you need to know that I'm not seriously considering moving. I wanted to be upfront about that. And when Dan called to invite us for an interview, that's not what came out of my mouth. What I said was, okay, so here we are. So fast forward to us preparing for the trip, and many of our friends, anytime I'd mention it, they'd say, oh, we don't want to see you go, and I'd say, don't worry about it. We're not going to move. And then some of them challenged me on that, and so I started saying, okay, unless God does something amazing down there, we're not going to move. Well, I figured I needed to give the Lord some space to work, so for the week leading up to it, I really prayed that he would soften our hearts and open our minds to this. And now we were ready for the trip. And one of the criteria that had to be met was we needed an easy back and forth between Houston and Philadelphia. Our flight was delayed, which isn't a huge deal, but it didn't help anything. And what I didn't tell anybody down here is that on the flight down, there was a medical emergency that I responded to. So it was just an insane flight. I ended up giving an injection, some medications, and it was a high adrenaline situation. So once again, I didn't get a chance to prepare for the interview like I had planned, and didn't get a chance to go back to the hotel room before going to dinner. But we made it to dinner, and on the way, so Dan picked us up from the airport. We're driving through downtown Houston, and I'm looking out the window, and I think, oh shoot, because I can already feel the Holy Spirit at work in my heart. Then we get to dinner. We sit down with some amazing people, and I sat next to Oscar from El Salvador. El Salvador has been a significant part of my life since I was 11 years old, and the rest of the conversation was great, and I could see myself fitting right in. So when we finally got to the hotel after a long day of travel, I asked Chandler if he had any thoughts, and at that point he didn't have anything to share. But I told him I think we need to take this seriously, and he agreed. So by Saturday, we were driving around with Sharon Kay, looking at neighborhoods, and I knew at that point that we'd be grieving something, whether it be Philadelphia or the experience of what this could be. So I knew that this was a serious thing, and I figured it would be professionally a good fit after having dinner with Taylor and Jeff and Marcy that night. I heard some things I needed to hear. And then Sunday was church, ABF, and lunch, and that was all great. And I share a lot of this with you, like the job pursuit and the opportunities I had, not to boast in any way, but just to let you know how much I am choosing you and how much we are choosing you. And on our way back home, our flight was as smooth as could be. By Monday, when we discussed our thoughts at the end of the workday, we determined that if we are invited back for a View of a Call weekend, that we would go. So this time was a lot different perspective heading into it. So now we're excited to be here. We're excited for this possibility. We can see God's hand in getting us to say yes to you, and so we're hopeful that you will also say yes to us. And my commitment to you, should I be given the opportunity, is that I will be prayerfully asking that I would be less of me and more of him, and that I would represent Sugar Land Baptist Church in Houston and around the world in that way. So thank you very much.
And just in case you didn't read her bio a couple of weeks ago, her first career was a nurse. So she wasn't just randomly responding to a medical emergency. She's trained to do that. That's part of what the committee loved about her. She spent a first part of her professional life in nursing, felt God's calling, as many of you have felt God's calling through the years, to take a big risk for Jesus. And she took a big risk and switched careers, spent some time in Costa Rica as a missionary, and has a real heart for people from all over the world. And her family, always growing up, her dad was a pastor. They always had exchange students in their home. That's just been a part of her life, to be a welcoming presence to people from all over this planet. And I just can tell you, when we think about the gifts we need in this church, one of those gifts is to be a welcoming presence from people all over the planet, because we already have people from all over the planet, and we know it will be more and more.